Good evening. Let's do that again. Good evening. Yes. I'm going to be brief. I'm Dr. Lori Bettison-Barg. I'm the President and Director of the Natural History Museums of Los Angeles County, and I cannot tell you how excited we are to have you here tonight. You can feel the energy. You can feel the energy outside. We're just delighted. We had a line again after 2 years. It's just great. So I'm going to turn this over to Marisol Jara, who's our Manager of Public Programs. But before I do that, I just want to say that the Public Programs team, in fact, the entire museum has been really trying to make sure that all of you had the content of this incredible place accessible to you during COVID, during the shutdown, the worst part of the shutdown, and throughout. And I just want to, give a shout out to my incredible staff for all that they've done to support this work. Because a museum, right, it's not really just what's about around you, it's about the people who work here. And they love Los Angeles, and we are a museum of, for, and with Los Angeles. So thank you, and I'm going to have Marisol come up.
Thank you, Lori. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to First Fridays. This 2022 season, titled From Seeds to Psychedelics, we look to the power of plants to save us, returning to the roots of well-being with new ideas drawn from ancient ways. Each month, join us for dynamic discussions designed to be thought-provoking and inspiring. Later on this evening, join us in the Nature Gardens on the main stage with DJ Lonnie Love, followed by performances by Il Peach and Spill Tap. We'd like to acknowledge our media partner, KCRW, and our event partner, I Am Sound. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, not only for tonight, but for the entire First Friday season. Please welcome neuroscientist and science communicator, Dr. Yewande Pearse. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Marisol, and welcome to First Fridays. I can't tell you how excited I am to be here in person and to see half of all of your faces, but I'm glad we're together. It's a really nice feeling being up here, and I'm excited for this discussion especially. So thank you to the Natural History Museum for having me, and I can't wait to get started. I think we need to hold on to our seats because this one is about psychedelic plants. Who knows where the conversation is going to take us? So the title of the discussion, Plants with Benefits, is all about understanding psychedelic plant medicine and the link between science and the ceremonial use of sacred plants. From mind-enhancing to well-being, we embrace the benefits of psychedelics. We'll find out during this discussion. So our guest this evening is Dr. Labate, Anthropologist and Executive Director of the Chacruna Institute for Psychedelic Plant Medicines. Woo, come on, welcome. Okay. Dr. Labate has a PhD in social anthropology from the State University of Campinas, Brazil. Welcome, Dr. Labate. It's so good to be here with you this evening.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we've got a lot to talk about, and we've got an hour to do it. And also just a reminder that there's going to be a Q&A at the end of the discussion. So start thinking about your questions, because we'd also like this to be interactive and to get some of your input as well. But I have a question just to set the scene. You have such an incredible background. So, can we just start maybe by talking a little bit about your own first encounter with plant medicine, and then how that led you to your PhD in anthropology, and then becoming the founder of the Chacruna Institute, which, as we'll see, is a very unique institute in the work that you do.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. For me, it's also a great emotion to be here today. I've also been in the thick of COVID. I just want to send my prayers and stand in solidarity with the people of the Ukraine right now. While we celebrate being the opportunity to be here together in person and alive, it's not the same for all people across the planet today. And I really, send my prayers, and also just want to say that I'm a recent immigrant, so for me to be in LA is a great emotion. I feel like I'm in the movies, sincerely, driving and seeing Hollywood. And so I'm just really happy to be here and, talking about my trajectory. What can I say? I tried psychedelics, I fell in love, and I was kind of obsessed with it.
Funny enough, I think a lot of stories start with that.
That's the truth. So when you like something and you're kind of nosy and you're kind of like gossip and curious, and when I ask all kinds of questions, you call yourself an anthropologist, and then you're allowed to go, and when you like psychedelics, and then you say you're an anthropologist studying psychedelics. So that's about it. I tried first, when I was 20, I was backpacking, a big adventure, good old days in Mexico. And I tried psilocybin and peyote and LSD, and it was really incredible. Changed my view and my understanding about everything. And that purity of like the youth and visiting ruins and having views of other realities, other paradigms, other futures, other pasts, other realities, and taking psychedelics and meeting people and being the only outsider led me to curiosity. And later on I tried ayahuasca in Brazil. I am Brazilian. And I got a little fanatical, I would say. Those days are gone, I'm more balanced. But yes, I was a little bit very, very enthusiastic, and just started to study it because it was organic. Like, you want to understand, you want to learn, you ask questions, you ask the people, you visit the land. And to me, the passion has been always related. So learning about the plants took me to the people and to the lands. So it's a part of a unit for me. The culture in which this comes is as beautiful as the experience. And so I took all my studies that way, and then I ended up living in different countries, pursuing work opportunities. Lived in Germany, USA, Germany, Mexico, and now in the US. And here, I was more an academic my entire life, and here I created this institute with my partner, my wife that is here, Dr. Clancy Kavner, who's American, and ultimately the main reason that I am here.
Thank you for that. I mean, when going back to the beginning of your trajectory, so you've tried a number of different plant medicines while traveling, and you're an anthropologist. It's all about connecting with humans, and then starting this institute and connecting there. I think that there's an authenticity in your work that is really interesting. And actually, in looking at your background, you have written so many texts, and there's so much writing about a lot of the things that you've studied as an academic. And I think what's very unique about it is how it actually is infused into culture and how important that is. So, as I say, you've written a lot about, for example, ayahuasca diaspora, and yourself, you traveled and you had all of these experiences. So I'm just wondering, actually, at the moment, I think a lot of people are aware of this, thinking about ayahuasca. It's something that is coming up more and more now. The expansion of ayahuasca use, both in terms of what you've previously described as inverse colonialism and psychedelic tourism. Do you think that, what is the impact that we need to think about as this becomes more and more popular?
Yeah, I think LA is probably one of the biggest hubs, I would say, of ayahuasca culture in the United States. I mean, of course, we don't really know because there's not systemic research, and all of these things are semi-underground, and it's hard to know. But definitely the use of ayahuasca has totally spread beyond the Amazon, and the genie is out of the bottle, and it's touched a lot of people. And it spread not only to the US, but to Europe, to South Africa, to Australia, and practically everywhere I know of, in North America, in cities. And so there has been a lot of buzz, and talking about LA again, a lot of celebrities and a lot of private ceremonies and expensive retreats and things like that. And there's a big discussion about the impacts of this for indigenous people and on the global south. And it's one of those topics that involve a lot of passion and dispute. Let's say in one extreme, there are the people that are completely against it and say, well, this is cultural appropriation and we stole the lands of indigenous people, and now we're stealing the last thing they have is their spirituality, and this is creating exploitation and abuse and all kinds of problems. And then on the other extreme, there is like the kind of naive sort of, oh, you know, ayahuasca wants to go beyond the Amazon and cure white people and bring and save the planet, and ayahuasca wants to globalize, and ayahuasca wants us to be drinking, and if we only drink, and this is going to like open our consciousness, and you know, the world will be different. And where do I stand in that? I think that is like everything else, it's complex, it's nuanced, it's just not one thing or another. There's different angles, and you know, I think a more balanced view should take into account that indigenous people are deeply suffering in the global south. In my country of Brazil at the moment, there is a genocide by the president, and indigenous people have sought support from foreigners, from Americans and others, and are looking proactively for partnerships, and ayahuasca has been a way to establish those partnerships. Ayahuasca has also been a way to create self-esteem, cultural pride, and this idea that they have something to offer. You could also say that there is this kind of reverse colonization. First, the old world brought their spirituality, Christianity to the Americas, and now the Americas are giving back traditions, spiritual, indigenous, rooted back, and you can say that in a way it's this reverse colonization happening. So it's shamanizing and indigenizing the West. But I think, again, it's complicated because this exchange doesn't happen on equal terms.
Yeah.
And so there is a hierarchy and there is an inequality. And so in this exchange, indigenous people have less resources and sometimes have to commodify things in order to survive. So a lot of retreats are owned by foreigners, and the locals end up being the maids, the cooks, the chauffeurs. And the same here in the US, a lot of people making money out of this that doesn't translate back into communities. But again, I am not those kinds of radical anthropologists that is all against, you know, the globalization, because I don't think it's useful to be against it. As we talk right now, there's tons and tons of gallons of ayahuasca being cooked in the Amazon to serve to a hungry Westerner crowd that needs healing and that wants that. And so for us in Chacruna, it's about education, it's about awareness, it's about harm reduction, it's about conversation, it's about reciprocity, it's about cultural legitimacy, and that's the kind of work we're trying to do in our institute.
Absolutely, thank you for that. And as you've pointed out, it's very nuanced, it's very complex. And when we talk about these indigenous ceremonies and the fact that ayahuasca has been something that's been practiced for millennia, you can kind of sometimes just all lump it together as the same thing, and it really isn't, because different ceremonies have different practices, and how this kind of becomes global and is taken out of these indigenous communities is going to be different. And then I think also the questions that are being asked, it's also science. Science is incredibly interested in a lot of this, and we'll get on to talking about psilocybin later on, but with ayahuasca, how do you kind of bring that into a lab? You can't. So it's very complex, and I know that Chacruna does a lot of work in trying to educate. And so there's a program, I think, that is called the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative of the Americas. Could you maybe expand a little bit on that and what that program is about?
Yes, the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative of the Americas is, we have created a network of 20 indigenous groups that we partner with throughout different countries: Brazil, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Costa Rica, Mexico, US, and Canada. And the criteria to join our program is grassroots organizations, so that are led by indigenous people, for indigenous people, sometimes partnerships with non-indigenous, but mainly indigenous-led. And there are collectives, so not just one family or one individual single traveling shaman, and that have a kind of history and a kind of track record of doing things. And the basic idea is, frankly, it's a lot related to my immigrant experience and coming to the US and seeing this amount of privilege and money that exists here versus what we have in South America. I think people still don't realize how this country has so many resources compared elsewhere. So, you know, let's allocate what's here and give some and share. And so the idea is that these groups, they have their own programs. It's also not just related to psychedelics, because some groups don't have the psychedelics that we like, so we don't care for them. So it's just, it's products that it's not only psychedelics, but like food security, environmental things, land and territory, language, culture, health, all kinds of projects. And then we have this program that we collect donations and we redistribute equally. And we also have on the website their contact. So we're not like gatekeepers, and people can just go to the website and find the projects and the groups that they like and donate directly to them. And we are trying to do what we call decolonizing philanthropy, which is like, we're not asking our indigenous partners for sexy fundraising decks, sexy impact and markers and sexy, you know, narratives and marketing materials or even proof of what they're doing. We understand that they are on the ground and they know what they need and they know what they have to do. Of course, they have to send a kind of report in the end, but it's not conditioned. It's for them to use any way they wish. And so the main inspiration of this is that we didn't invent this. There's people that came before us that, you know, what is the difference between, you have a forest full of plants, millions of plants, and then you find two that combined create this incredible effect. That's the case of ayahuasca. And this, you know, or among all mushrooms, you find the ones that are psychoactive and you create and you use that, versus a scientist that maybe created a synthetic version of that on a laboratory, who did the biggest discovery. And a lot of the psychedelic science is based in imitating indigenous people and researching their behaviors. So our idea is that indigenous people are the real, you know, pioneers. It didn't start in the counterculture.
Yeah.
It didn't start with white men in California. And if you like psychedelics in one way or another, we are all heirs of indigenous people. And so it's time to give back. And giving back and reciprocity is not, I give you something and you give me back. No, I already took a lot and now I'm giving back.
Yeah, I love that. I love that work that you do, and I think it's very unique, the approach that the Chacruna takes. And actually talking a little bit about this narrative and the counterculture, I think one that we hear over and over again when we're talking about psychedelics, and as you say, it's not just psilocybin and ayahuasca, but other plants that are yet to be discovered, is this idea that it was researched in the 50s and 60s, then seeped into the counterculture, then was banned by the FDA, and then in the 90s we had this renaissance of psychedelic drug research, which of course, I mean, these psychedelics plants are really interesting for science and neuroscience, but like you say, it started with indigenous communities, and I think bringing the two together and making sure that there is, like you said, this reciprocity is really important. So thinking about that and actually drug policies, which I think is really central to this conversation, you've done a lot of work around drug policies, and I think it's interesting to think about, for example, ayahuasca. There are ayahuasca churches because, you know, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993 means that the ayahuasca is part of religious ceremonies, and so it can't be shut down, but then also the research was shut down in the 60s. So I'm really curious to get your thoughts on the most important cultural considerations for the legitimacy of psychedelic plants beyond the scientific value, because of that narrative that now it's useful for science, psychedelics are good again. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, very good question. I really like it when the moderator read the stuff, and I think you are totally on the loop of everything we do. So, yeah, obviously, you know, the science is super important and necessary, and I support the science. But it's not because the science is showing that this is legitimate, that this is legitimate. No, the science is catching up. This is legitimate in itself, and before and independent of the science. You don't need, you know, if you go to a shaman, he doesn't need the FDA to approve his singing and his healing, and there's a bit of a confusion. So for us, it's the science and the healing. Traditionally, sacred plants for indigenous people have to do with territory, have to do with identity, have to do with celebration, have to do with arts, have to do with politics, have to do with the cosmological world, have to do with interethnic exchanges, has to do with the very idea of what it is to be human. Why are we here? Where did we come from? Where are we going? What is there beyond? What is in the invisible world? Where are the dead people? Where are the ancestors? When does it end and why? So these big existential questions, why do we exist? Why does the planet exist? For a lot of different traditions, the very narration of the myth of origin of psychedelics is the myth of origin of humankind. And that's how we are human, and that's how we're defined. So it's deeply, deeply embedded in culture. And it's not counterculture. It's not to be rebellious or to challenge the system. It's part of the system. It's a way to transmit knowledge, to teach other people, and to teach children, starting by early, teaching children how to be better people, how to be in society, how to relate to the human, to the world of the non-humans. So it has a lot to do. And then you can say, okay, be a very nice, but you're talking about like shamans, I don't know where, and what about us? What about here? What about this crazy societies? That's not, people like to idealize a lot also, South American and shamans, and I see that as a Brazilian, it's funny, I'm like, it's not so, it's not just flowers, it's not just easy. I think it has to do with us in many ways as well, not just healing, but you take psilocybin, for example. It's very, it has a deep presence in American culture. Mm-hmm. There's this whole foraging movement. I think Americans often think they have no culture and everybody else has culture. There is a culture here. I have news for you. You have a culture. There is a huge scene of people foraging mushrooms, and it's a bit gourmet, so it's related to nutrition, it's a bit medicinal and therapeutic, it's recreational or for pleasure, for aesthetics. There's a huge movement here, so there is all these dimensions with psilocybin. There is the religious uses of ayahuasca and other plants. There's the religious uses of cannabis, Rastafarianism. There's so many things. So there is the therapeutic modality, there is the religious modality, and there is the modality for adult use, for exploration, for art. I was in this panel with this ex-psychiatrist president of the American Psychiatrist Association. And he said to me, what is the proof that you have that psychedelics are useful for creativity? I said, why don't you try Googling it? Because, I mean, I want a scientific paper to prove that to me. And I asked him, did you try psychedelics? He said, yes. Did you have a good experience? He said, yes. And then he started to say his experience. And then our colleague asked him, but which peer-reviewed paper is proving that what you're telling me is true? And that's a little bit, you know, the science is just getting a part of it.
I think that you raise a really good point, because I want to stay on this topic for a bit longer, because there is this tension between scientific value, spiritual value. I'm a neuroscientist, I have a neuroscience background, so of course I'm really interested in what psychedelic plants, these chemicals are doing in the brain and what the mechanisms are. And there are scientific methods to find answers to questions, but they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, and they can all inform each other. So I think really focusing on the culture, or having conversations between anthropologists, people from the humanities, the arts, people with personal experiences, and taking all of that is only going to inform our understanding, not just about the medicinal benefits of psychedelics, but of course the really, really deep-rooted questions about, you know, religion and spirituality. And interestingly, with psilocybin, I think one of them, John Hopkins does a lot of research on this, and so one of the studies that's really pivotal is about showing how in 80% of their sample, people had these mystical experiences, which they were then able to define and sort of figure out what a mystical experience is, and those experiences are long-lasting. So if that's the commonality, why shy away from that? I think that's a really interesting question. So when we're having these conversations about these psychedelic plants, why is the value misplaced, and why is it only about the medicine, when actually the human existence, you know, consciousness and our connection with, you know, our purpose is just as important. So thank you for raising that. I think that's really important to reflect on.
Yeah, I like to compare like science and shamanism, and I do think that there is a lot of things to exchange and to learn. And there's fantastic work being done, for example, studying meditation of monks and all kinds of things. The model of psychedelic assisted therapy, as I say, there is this continuity. Shamanism, the underground, the shamanic uses, then therapeutic undergrounds, and then the above ground, the FDA clinical trials. There is a lot of continuities and a lot of similarities and things that are common to these threads. I like to point out kind of my role as an anthropologist speaking to a medical audience. I also have a part-time job in MAPS. I'm not speaking here as a MAPS representative. I have more autonomy as a Chacruna representative. But I also support, you know, research with MDMA and creating new treatments for PTSD and other things like that. For me as an anthropologist, I'm always trying to point out what we can learn from other traditions. So more how, for example, let's take the idea of healing. The whole idea that you have one property, one substance, that heals one disease. It's very very Western.
Yeah.
When I wanted to create our book, I wanted to call the therapeutic uses of ayahuasca, and the editor wanted to say the therapeutic use of ayahuasca. It's not the therapeutic uses of Viagra, right? You have one medicine that is one disease, and that's how you operate. Traditionally, it's not like that. You have one medicine that is individualized. You can add other plants. The doses varies depending on the patient. And the idea of healing is more of a holistic enterprise, something that involves a series of dimensions. So healing from like an Amerindian perspective, it's not just about the properties of one substance and the effects on one person, but is this spirit plant, and it's the relationship the person has, the physical property, the disease, the physical dimension, but it's also the relationship this person has with kin, with the community, and with this world beyond, the invisible world, the world of non-humans. And then the idea is that these are plants that in fact are like spirits. They have agency, they have intentionality, they have idiosyncrasies, they have personalities, they have wishes. And you have to learn to communicate with these plants. It's a different idea than a substance. And for example, the doctor he takes the substance as well. It's different from our medical doctor. When you're going to the doctor, he's not taking that with you. Because you're both communicating to, in some cases, just the doctor will take the substance to do the healing, and not the patient. And for us, only the patient. So I am trying to look, this idea of plant spirit versus synthetics. These are the things that I think we can learn. And also age. Starting, for us, it's completely brutal to think of a child having a hallucinogenic drug. That's like major parental abuse. Traditionally, a child will start taking small doses and participating with parents. And so, yes, I like what, looking at indigenous people can help us rethink the ways we classify drugs, the very definitions. Recreational, therapeutic, religious, they are definitions that kind of limit the modality of experience. It's, as I say, it is part of a larger whole. And so I think these dialogues, I'm looking more on this side. What can scientists teach indigenous people? That's a good research to do. I feel more compelled to say what indigenous people can teach scientists, but there's a lot of room. So a lot of ideas for people that want to create research.
Absolutely. I have to advocate for science and the scientific method as a scientist, but I definitely respect that value because, I mean, to talk about psilocybin a little bit, it was made as Schedule I drug, and then a lot of the research went underground. And so now, actually, when you look at the research, the results are stunning. So I think one of the initial studies was in quote-unquote healthy populations. So what kind of experiences do you have with psilocybin? And then they started to research different groups, people with treatment-resistant depression, OCD, anxiety, addiction, tobacco addiction, alcohol addiction, and see really profound results after just one use. And that's really encouraging if you're trying to actually, you were talking about healing, so develop these treatments. But what I find really interesting is that the protocols are very specific, and there's a lot of focus on how these experiments are done, the screening, making sure that there aren't any risks that go into this. So there are three parts. So you have this interaction with someone like a psychiatrist first to guide you and build trust. Then you have the experience, and then you have integration. But actually, as you say, when you're actually thinking of how psilocybin is taken amongst indigenous communities, it's very different. So I wonder how the two can kind of work together. So like what degree can ancient wisdom and modern science actually truly interact? Because I'm sure if you were to read the protocol, you have connections with maps, it's very different to what you're describing. And I think that a lot could be learned by bringing the two together.
Yes, I agree. As I say, I think this is a very new field. It's under development. And there's rooms for all kinds of learning opportunities. We're just really beginning. There is currently a kind of psychedelic gold rush or something.
Definitely.
It is the beginning of a boom. Mm-hmm. And, some people call it the psychedelic industry, some people call the psychedelic sector, the psychedelic ecosystem. The fact is that it's exploding. It's really exploding. And there's a lot of people that are opportunistic, and there's a lot of vulgarization, and a lot of banalization, and a lot of commodification. But there's also a lot of hope, and a lot of healing, and a lot of opportunity. So it's up to us really to gather as communities and gear this movement in ways that we can, because there's also the previous example of cannabis. I have here one person that is an important cannabis lawyer, Ariel Clark, that is my friend and is part of Chacruna. She's our general counsel and based here in LA. And we have seen what happened with the movement of cannabis, and how a lot of people that were traditional growers were excluded from the market that was created, how challenging it is for people that maybe have criminal records, and how expensive the license are. And what's happening with psychedelics is just on the verge to be defined. There are some emerging companies with very strong patent wars. There's a lot of investments, and there's also just scams. Somebody creating companies and selling a bunch of stocks, cashing in and dropping out. And now psychedelic startups are falling. The stocks are falling, and there is a kind of crisis because a lot of people came into this naive and, for example, didn't know that there could be potential adverse effects with psychedelics. So when Compass Pathway published their findings about psilocybin for depression, there has been a report of a few adverse cases, and that had a strong effect apparently on the market because a lot of people didn't know that there could be side effects or bad effects with psychedelics eventually. And also that these things take like 10 years to develop. And so there is this whole rush. In this context, and sorry that I got really distracted from the question you asked me.
No, I think this is really to the point, which is that it's new, and like you say, things are moving quickly, there are opportunities, but I think we just have to hold in balance sort of what the goal is, what the common goals are, what our individual goals are, and how we can just improve our understanding of psychedelic plant medicine, understanding of ourselves, and how we can work together. So again, yeah, absolutely, there are sometimes adverse effects. Psychedelics are very different from a lot of other drugs in that it has low toxicity and, you know, I think low toxicity, not as addictive, that's great, but then it actually does change, you know, your mind and your flexibility of your mind and how receptive you are to things. So the environment's really important, and people, there are risks as well. So I think that's a really good point that you made. And talking about who's included in this conversation about this renaissance that we're having and this rush, I think one of the things that the Chacruna Institute is trying to do is uplift voices that are normally excluded from those conversations around psychedelics, such as Indigenous people we've talked about a lot, Black people, POC women, queer people, and academics from the humanities. And by doing this, having this focus, we're rewriting the narrative and actually influencing the future of the psychedelic field. So you've spoken before about the need for cultural therapy, not just psychedelic therapy. What does that actually mean, and how do you achieve it? Because I think that it's a very unique perspective that you bring to the conversation.
Yeah, this idea of cultural therapy, frankly, I just invented in a lecture, and then some people started to repeat to understand it, like my both parents are psychologists and my wife is a psychologist. I'm surrounded by psychologists, and they all think they are smarter than you, and that's my revenge to them. So they talk about therapy and they interpret you all the time, and I'm thinking, you're just talking about the therapy of the individual. I'm talking about a cultural therapy. It's like, what are you talking about, Bia? I'm talking about what is therapy. Therapy is that I did a lot of therapy too, you know, of course. Being daughter of a psychologist, I also teach in a psychology department. I forgot, there's that too. So the therapy is that you rewrite the story that you tell from yourself to yourself, right? Mm-hmm. You stop telling that story and you start telling a new story. And so it's the same thing we have to do about drugs. We have to tell us another story. We have to rewrite the story that we're telling ourselves about drugs, because that story is perverted. It's based on ignorance. It's based on religious dogma. It's a legacy of inquisition. It's a legacy of moral wars, of cultural wars. It's legacy of economic forces. The drug war was a way to persecute minorities, to associate certain minorities to certain habits. And as you couldn't persecute these minorities, you persecute their habits and their plants and their traditions. And so we need to, that's what I'm saying about, the need to understand that these things have a place. They are part integral part of life. They are just part, because for us it's still a bit childish, like hee hee hee, like poo, pee pee, like you talk about it in a childish way, because it's a bit embarrassing. We cringe a bit about it. It's not fully admitted, and so it's about creating more naturalities, about you being able to share with your family on Thanksgiving about your experiences. It's about being able to take time off from work and talking about it. It's about this, and we need to create this education, because this is not just going to appear. And where is this education? If you're interested in gardening, you can go to the Gardening Association. Like, where do you get your psychedelic information? In our site. You have to create a conversation about it. You have to create. I cherish this museum. I'm so happy to be here. This is such a wonderful place. This is the kind of thing that makes me a happy immigrant to the United States. When I see an institution like this, I just think there's a lot of really fantastic things, and this is going to lead me to the other part of your question about inclusions and minorities. The United States also healed me a lot. You know, there are people that died to get a green card to live here, still, even if this is such a madhouse. But it is a great country still. For me, it has been important to come out as queer. It has been extremely hard for me because I come from a very Catholic country, and I also lived in Mexico. Between Mexico and Brazil, it's a hard competition, which is more conservative and more homophobic, and kill more trans people. Brazil wins. So California healed me more than psychedelics in this. I learned to be queer here. And so, you know, we started to look at minorities and psychedelics. And just the stars of our conferences are not white biomedical scientists. We have them too. I have a lot of really wonderful white biomedical friends, loving, sweet, wonderful men, and all my gratitude to them. But the stars of our conferences are people of color, are queer people, are women, are people from the global south. We have an accent, and we're proud of it. And we're immigrants, and we're part of this country as well. And Chacruna is trying to give visibility to these minorities. And there is a race war here. There's a strong race war in this country. And when I joined Chacruna patron meetings and I see people of color that are paying to be part of Chacruna, that's for me, that's a huge recognition. That's more than talking in Harvard or Yale or here. That's when you have the trust of minorities that like what you're doing and support you. That's beautiful. That's hard to get, and money doesn't buy that. It helps. Yeah, we do need funding, by the way, a lot. But yeah, so Chacruna is trying to rewrite the story. Again, it didn't start, you know, in the counterculture. It didn't start with Hefter synthesizing.
LSD.
Yeah, it didn't start with our scientists. And also women, you know, think about the whole phase of the psychedelic renaissance in the 50s and 60s. All these male researchers, a lot of them had wives. The wives participated. The wives hold their hands when they're tripping and they are scared. That counts. You know, they help prep, they help take care of people, they help take notes, they help think the protocols. Their names don't appear on the research papers. They're invisible. They're invisibilized. There's a history of invisibilizing women in the field of psychedelic research. And so we're trying to rewrite that history. We have a series called Women in the History of Psychedelic Plant Medicine, talking about these voices that don't appear in the peer-reviewed publications. We have a book, Queer in Psychedelics, From Oppression to Liberation, celebrating queer people, the potential of queer people in healing. Maybe some queer people don't have children, but they are healers. They dedicate their energy, their libido to healing. And there's so many incredible things. And indigenous people, I talked a lot. And then there's African Americans and the incredible oppression that exists here and the lack of I think it's like 2 and 3% of psychiatrists and psychologists are African Americans in the United States. And then a lot of people, a lot of black folks think that psychedelics is like white people stuff,
Because of
white
the
treatment.
narrative, yeah.
And there's a lot of stigma. There's a history of using black and brown bodies for scientific experimentation without consent. There's a drug war that has incarcerated 3 times more black and brown people for similar offenses. There's the counterculture history that not always included people of color. And so there is a legacy of stigma. There's very minority of people of color as research PIs, subjects, clinicians, investigators. There needs to be new methods, new forms of recruitment, and more cultural sensitivity.
Absolutely.
I feel you want to talk.
No, I think that is a really great point to end on, and thank you for uplifting that. I think we could talk for a lot longer, but I'm really keen to get the audience's questions. But just on that note, I think we're really primed in this moment, even though this renaissance has been going on since the 90s. This is the time for diversity, inclusion, and actually working together and changing that narrative, I think, is the take-home message. It's not just about the counterculture and, you know, the renaissance in therapy. So we're actually really keen to get your questions. So I think some of our members, they're going to be coming around with a microphone. So please raise your hand. We've got someone over there. And if you have a question, the Natural History Museum staff will keep hold of the microphone and then you can ask your question. Thank you.
So I assume we're going to have a tasting in the garden later on tonight.
Just on your way out.
Anyways, I was curious, like in your research, have you come across any plants that have gone extinct that has some really unique properties, and could you get like, maybe it's a way to bring it back, or?
I didn't understand, sorry.
Sorry, like in all your studies, have you come across any references to plants that don't exist anymore, that have some very unique properties that we've lost? And is there a way to bring them back?
I don't know how to answer that now, sorry. I have to think. Not coming up anything.
It's a good question, synthetic biology and bringing that back. Okay, we have a question over here.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. So, my mom said if I do drugs, I would burn holes in my brain. So, I'm wondering if there's any research about the long-term effects of these drugs, and if we need to think about these risks as this conversation enters the mainstream.
The drugs would burn holes in the brain, so there are these risks, and if there is any long-term research about the effects of taking some of these psychedelic substances, and I think
About risks.
it was about the risks and caution. How we
Yeah,
can be
I think
cautious.
it's an important question, I thank you. It's really important to make a distinction between like my advocacy for psychedelics versus saying that everybody has to take psychedelics. So I am advocating for my right and the right of the people that want to take psychedelics to not be incarcerated and to have legitimacy and right, which is different than some people that are kind of messianic and want everybody to take psychedelics and think that taking psychedelics is the solution for everything. That's not my stance. And psychedelics are not a panacea, and they're not for everything. And it's not like a one pill that heals everything, and once you have it, it's, you know, you have it, and you're all cured. There can be challenges, and for certain people in certain contexts, it's really not recommended. And you do have to have important triage and preparation, and certain mental health conditions are not really ideal, and much research has to be done still. And there's also other kinds of related problems, like all areas of life, right? When you go to a mechanic, there's always a charlatan. When you go to the police officer, there's always one that is corrupt. So it's the same in the field of psychedelics. You have the charlatan practitioner, and you have people that take advantage of others. You have people that do sexual abuse. You have people that fake substances. So you have all kinds of challenges. It's important to be aware of them. And for that, prohibition is not the solution. For that, harm reduction and education and open conversation is the solution. Conversations like this one.
That's a great answer. Okay, we have another question just over here.
Thank you both ladies for this conversation. It's really refreshing to see two women that are of culture and of color to speak about something so powerful. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
You're welcome. And my question, for those of us who are in academia, say at like a Cal State, if we want to reach out to Chacruna, for example, and we want to have education so that we can share it with our students, how would we do so? Thank you.
Great question. I think we might have something actually to share, but please go ahead, Bea.
Yeah, we're super open for collaboration. I'll be around after, if you want to write to us, info@chacruna.net. I make a lot of jokes, part of my personality. I was kind of repressed in academia, and I decided to go para-academic, and now I'm more free to say whatever. But, we're also interested in collaboration with academics. We're kind of academic. Frankly, I am a PhD, much more than I'm an executive director. And we're lacking very much like that business mind. I make this joke too. People say, how can I join your movement? I say, please don't be an anthropologist. Please don't be a psychologist. Please don't love ayahuasca and, talk about the healing potentials. We need business people, please. We really need people with money and people that, have MBA on Stanford and it's very hard to be a grassroots nonprofit organization. And for us, we don't have something so deliverable, like culture, consciousness. I had this argument with the donor. I said, I made this incredible modesty pitch, and he said, you're brilliant, but I'm not gonna give you a penny. I said, okay, that's fair enough. It's your money. But I asked him, how much does an idea cost for you? What is the price of an idea? Because how do you create ideas and you change people's minds? And that is hard. So those of us working on this cultural education arena, and again, so nice to see a place like this promoting education. It's just hard to have support. So we're very much looking for support and potential partners, and from the small to the big. We also have a membership system, a patron system. We have about 500 members. We're about 1/3 sustainable of what we need to be at this point. So my dream is to triple our membership and, continue the American dream for me.
Do we have any more questions? I think we have one just down here.
Okay. Hi, as everyone else has said before me, I want to say thank you to both of you, and I was wondering if you could go more into depth about your first experience with ayahuasca.
This is for Professor Labate.
Well, I was 26, so I tried psilocybin mushrooms and peyote and all that when I was backpacking. And that was 1.5 years that I was doing this big adventure. Got married on the way, all kinds of adventures. Then after that, stayed 5 years without doing anything. Just kind of digesting, frankly. And when I was 26, I tried ayahuasca again. It was so beautiful. It was the most beautiful thing. And I literally thought I understood the whole history of humanity. everything. And I actually said to the guy that gave it to me, to this ritual, I understood everything. And he laughed. And then I said, I want to go to the Amazon. And this is the path of the plants is an ongoing path. It's like an art, like if you study music, when do you know enough? The more you study, the less you know, and the more you want to study. And the more humble you should be. Or maybe more egomaniac. That happens too. There's a lot of people that get a lot of vanity out of their experiences because it is this thing that is so powerful. And indigenous people say, you know, like this use that is like for self-aggrandizement and for vanity and for power and to feeling better, that's kind of the easy temptation that comes first. And you have to go through that. You don't see the shamans going around saying, I am this, I am that. They're just quiet listening, you know. The shaman's not going around saying, I'm a great expert. And so I think that is the humbleness that we have to learn with psychedelics, how to hold these incredible visions with some sense of modesty and that we are really just a little piece of everything. And the same thing, this tension between oneness and identity politics, because we are all different. Black, white, gay, not gay, rich, poor, Brazilian, American. We all have specificities, and psychedelics show us that we are part of this larger whole. We are together, and there exists something beyond all of this. But we can't deny this as well, because those are historical constructs that exist and guide relationships. So how can you hold this tension? And how can you hold this tension between self-growth and personal and individual and outwork and activism, politics, social change, social movement, transformation? Because it's not all about just me, me, me. I get so bored, go to some retreats that people talk about themselves all the time. And they never go talk to the person that is in the kitchen cooking or go to the town and try to learn. Talk to the local. Learn another language. So it's about us, but it's also about the environment. It's about what is beyond us, about the collective. And so all of this are very psychedelic topics.
Absolutely.
That is an ongoing school to learn.
Absolutely, well said. And that's why this whole season is dedicated to plants. So we're definitely trying to uplift them. I think there's one last question.
Hello, I'm a physician, I'm a dictionologist and a Native American as well. I find the science of the psychedelic medications that are coming to be very important for the future of addiction treatment of depression, anxiety, and other issues. But I think Americans have to understand the best is always no drugs, natural. But when one is ill, we need medications and drugs and plants to help us feel better. And unfortunately, in the United States, you were bringing up the me culture. You know, 80% of all the illicit drugs in the world come to the United States. We represent 4% of the world's population, yet we have the majority of the drug addicts and misuse of drugs, not just illicit, but pharmaceutical brands as well. And so the issue of using psychedelics for the future is so exciting. And it's not going to be a kind of drug that we use regularly, but we're finding that in addiction treatment, we can treat someone for 5, 6 episodes, and we can help them through their addiction so that they don't revert or relapse. So this is a very exciting area. We're just at the beginning. I think that it will be very important, and I know everyone here came because they're interested in the topic. You know, we all grew up in the 60s and 70s with this sort of thing, but the science is very important. And as an indigenous person, as a physician, the science is very important. I cannot tell you more than that if we do not emphasize the science behind what we're doing, we're not going to be able to use these drugs in the appropriate manner. So that was just what I had to offer.
Thank you so much for that comment. I think that brings us full circle, and I absolutely will uplift that point. I think, yes, the science is important, transparency, education, the why is all incredibly important. So thank you so much for your questions. I think we're at time. Bea, it's been such an incredible
Thank you so much.
conversation.